My daughter said I didn't understand success. So I bought the firm that rejected her. The call came at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday from a number I did not recognize. A woman with a voice like polished glass introduced herself as the senior partner's assistant at Whitmore Capital. She wanted to confirm my attendance at the shareholder meeting scheduled for the following week. I told her I would be there, thanked her, and ended the call. Then I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, watching the steam rise from my coffee, thinking about how strange it was that my daughter still did not know. She had applied to Whitmore Capital 8 months earlier, certain that her MBA from a respectable program and her 2 years at a regional consulting firm would be enough. She told me about the application over dinner at her apartment, her voice carrying that particular tone she reserved for moments when she wanted me to understand how far she had risen above my small ambitions. I run a heating and cooling repair business. I have done so for 31 years. My hands know the weight of copper tubing and the smell of refrigerant. And my daughter has spent most of her adult life making sure I understand that such knowledge means nothing in the world she has chosen to enter. I remember the exact moment she told me I did not understand success. We were standing in her kitchen, and she was explaining why she could not come to her cousin's wedding. There was a networking event, she said. Important people would be there, people who could open doors. I suggested that family was important too, and she laughed. Not cruelly, but with the kind of exhausted patience one might use with a slow child. "Dad," she said, "you spent your whole life fixing air conditioners. You don't understand how success actually works." I did not argue with her. I have learned that arguing with my daughter accomplishes nothing. Instead, I went home and sat in my office, the small room at the back of my house where I keep my files and my computer, and I thought about what she had said. She was not entirely wrong. I do not understand the world of investment firms and networking events and carefully curated LinkedIn profiles. But I understand other things. I understand patience. I understand compound interest. And I understand that the quiet work of decades can accumulate into something substantial when no one is paying attention. The rejection letter from Whitmore Capital arrived in March. My daughter called me the next day, her voice tight with fury. "They did not even give her an interview," she said. "Not even a screening call." She had submitted her application through their portal, followed up with a personalized email to 3 different partners, and received nothing but an automated response thanking her for her interest. "The position has been filled," the email said. "We wish you the best in your future endeavors." She blamed the economy. She blamed the hiring manager. She blamed the firm's outdated culture and their preference for Ivy League graduates. She did not blame herself, and I did not expect her to. My daughter has always believed that the world owes her something, and when it fails to deliver, the fault lies anywhere but within. I listened to her complaints for 20 minutes, making the appropriate sounds of sympathy at the appropriate moments. When she finally exhausted herself, I told her that perhaps another opportunity would come along. She made a sound of disgust and ended the call. That night, I began my research. Whitmore Capital is a mid-sized investment firm specializing in private equity. They manage roughly $400 million in assets, which sounds impressive until you realize that the truly large players measure their holdings in billions. The firm was founded in 1987 by a man named Harrison Whitmore, who died in 2019 and left his shares divided among his 3 children. 2 of those children had no interest in the business and sold their stakes within 18 months. The third, a daughter named Caroline, retained her father's position as chairman, but had been gradually reducing her involvement over the past 3 years. I learned all of this from public records, SEC filings, and a carefully worded conversation with a business broker I had known for 15 years. The broker, a man named Dennis, who had helped me purchase my second service van in 1998, was surprised to hear from me about investment opportunities. I told him I was thinking about diversifying. He laughed and said it was about time. The truth is that I have been diversifying for decades. I simply never talked about it. When my wife passed away 12 years ago, she left me with a life insurance payout that I did not need and could not bring myself to spend. I invested it carefully, following a strategy I had developed from library books and free seminars at the community college. Nothing flashy. Index funds, dividend stocks, a few REITs, the kind of boring, methodical approach that financial advisors recommend and almost no one actually follows because it requires patience and offers no excitement. My daughter does not know about this money. She does not know because she never asked. She assumed, as she has always assumed, that my life consists of nothing but service calls and invoices and the occasional fishing trip with my brother. She saw my modest house and my 12-year-old truck and concluded that I had never accumulated anything worth mentioning. I let her believe this because correcting her would have required a conversation I was not prepared to have. After Whitmore Capital rejected her, I began to watch the firm more closely. I set up news alerts. I read their quarterly reports. I attended a free webinar they hosted on emerging market opportunities, sitting in the back of a hotel conference room while a young man in an expensive suit explained concepts I had been applying to my own portfolio for years. The young man used many words but said very little, and I understood then why my daughter wanted so badly to work at a place like this. It was not about the work. It was about the appearance of importance. The opportunity came in late spring. Caroline Whitmore announced that she was stepping back from daily operations and looking to restructure the firm's ownership. The announcement was buried in an industry newsletter that reached perhaps 2,000 subscribers. I was one of them. I called Dennis, the broker, that afternoon and asked him to make some inquiries. The process took 4 months. There were lawyers and accountants and more paperwork than I had seen in my entire business career. There were conference calls with men who spoke in a language designed to exclude anyone who had not attended the right schools. I hired my own lawyer, a woman named Patricia, who had handled my wife's estate and who looked at the Whitmore documents with the same careful attention I give to a malfunctioning compressor. She found several things that concerned her. I told her to proceed anyway. I did not buy Whitmore Capital outright. I do not have that kind of money, and even if I did, such a purchase would have attracted attention I did not want. Instead, I acquired a 34% stake through a holding company that Patricia helped me establish. The company has a name that means nothing and an address that leads to a mailbox in Delaware. Caroline Whitmore retained 22%. The remaining shares are divided among 6 other investors, none of whom hold more than 12%. On paper, I am simply one voice among many. In practice, I am the largest single shareholder, and in the world of private equity, that means something. The day the acquisition closed, I drove to my daughter's apartment. She was not home. I left a small plant on her doorstep, a peace lily in a ceramic pot, with a card that said only that I was thinking of her. She texted me later to say thank you, followed by a reminder that she was very busy with work and would call when she had time. She did not call for 3 weeks. During those 3 weeks, I attended my first board meeting at Whitmore Capital. The conference room was exactly as I had imagined it, all glass and polished wood and leather chairs that probably cost more than my truck. The other board members looked at me with the particular expression that successful people reserve for those they cannot immediately categorize. I was not old money, or new money, or tech money, or any of the other categories they understood. I was simply a man in a clean suit that I had purchased at a department store, with hands that still showed the calluses of manual labor, who had somehow acquired enough shares to demand a seat at their table. I did not speak much during that first meeting. I listened. I watched the way the partners interacted, the subtle currents of alliance and rivalry that flowed beneath their professional courtesy. I noticed which of them checked their phones during discussions and which of them leaned forward when certain topics arose. I noticed that the partner responsible for hiring, a man named Stafford, spent most of the meeting looking bored. After the meeting, I asked to see the firm's personnel files. This request raised eyebrows. Board members do not typically concern themselves with such matters, but I am the largest shareholder, and the bylaws grant me certain rights. The files arrived at Patricia's office 3 days later, and I spent an evening reading through them, looking for something I was not sure I would find. I found it in a folder labeled Rejected Applications, 2024. My daughter's name was on page 47. The rejection note was brief. Not a culture fit. Recommend no further consideration. It was signed by Stafford. I thought about that phrase for a long time. Culture fit. It is a convenient term, one that can mean anything and therefore means nothing. It allows rejection without explanation, exclusion without accountability. I wondered what Stafford had seen in my daughter's application that made him write those words. I wondered if he had seen anything at all, or if he had simply glanced at her resume, noted the absence of certain markers he was trained to look for, and moved on. My daughter called me on a Sunday morning in October. She had news, she said. Good news. A friend from business school had connected her with a recruiter who specialized in investment firms. The recruiter had mentioned that Whitmore Capital was looking to expand their analyst team. My daughter was going to apply again. I told her that sounded promising. I asked if she had considered other firms. She said Whitmore was the one she wanted. It had prestige. It had the right culture. It would open doors. I listened to her talk about doors for 10 minutes, thinking about the folder in Patricia's office with her name on page 47. Then I wished her luck and ended the call. The next board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I arrived early and asked to speak with Stafford privately. He agreed, though I could see the reluctance in his face. We sat in a small office that smelled of leather and something faintly chemical, and I asked him to explain the firm's hiring philosophy. He talked for 15 minutes. He used words like synergy and alignment and value proposition. He explained the importance of finding candidates who would integrate seamlessly into the existing team. He mentioned the firm's legacy and its reputation and its careful attention to maintaining a certain standard. He did not mention my daughter, and I did not bring her up. When he finished, I thanked him and asked a single question. How many applications had the firm rejected in the past year? He did not know the exact number. I told him it was 312. His face changed, very slightly, and I understood that he had not expected me to have that information. I returned to the Hayao boardroom and waited for the meeting to begin. Caroline Whitmore sat at the head of the table, but she looked at me twice before calling the meeting to order. I think she understood, even then, that something had shifted. The motion I introduced was simple. I proposed that the firm establish a formal review process for rejected applications, requiring written justification for any candidate dismissed without an interview. The proposal was not unusual. Many firms have similar policies. But the way I introduced it, the careful neutrality of my voice, and the silence that followed, made it clear that this was not merely a procedural suggestion. Stafford voted against it. 2 other partners abstained. Everyone else voted in favor. The motion passed. Afterward, Carolyn asked to speak with me alone. We walked to a coffee shop 2 blocks from the office, a place with exposed brick and uncomfortable wooden chairs. She ordered an espresso. I ordered black coffee. She asked me why I had really invested in Whitmore Capital. I told her the truth. I told her about my daughter and her rejection and the phrase culture fit. I told her about 31 years of fixing air conditioners and the quiet accumulation of resources that no one had noticed. I told her that I did not want revenge. I wanted something smaller and more specific. I wanted the chance to show my daughter that success has many forms and that the world she has been taught to worship is not as impenetrable as she believes. Carolyn listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something I did not expect. She said her father had built Whitmore Capital with money he earned running a car dealership in New Jersey. She said he had spent his entire career trying to earn the respect of people who looked down on him for his origins. She said he never quite managed it, even after he became wealthier than most of them. I asked her what she wanted from the firm now. She said she wanted to know that it would survive, that her father's name would mean something after she was gone, that the work he had done would not be erased by the kind of men who use phrases like culture fit to protect their own mediocrity. We talked for another hour. By the end, I understood that Caroline and I wanted the same thing, though we had arrived at it from different directions. She wanted her father's legacy to mean something real. I wanted my daughter to understand that the barriers she faced were not as solid as they appeared. The second application came through in November. My daughter submitted it on a Tuesday and texted me on Wednesday to tell me she had done it. She was nervous, she admitted. She had been rejected once before. But the recruiter had assured her that the firm was looking for new perspectives, and she felt confident that things would be different this time. I told her I hoped so too. The review committee met the following week. I was not present for that meeting. Board members do not participate in hiring decisions. But I had arranged for the new policy to be in effect, and I knew that any rejection would now require documentation. Stafford reviewed my daughter's application. He wrote a 2-page memorandum explaining his concerns. He cited her limited experience in private equity. He questioned whether her background in consulting had prepared her adequately for the firm's specific approach. He concluded by recommending that she be granted an initial screening interview, but noted that he had reservations about her potential fit. The screening interview was conducted by a junior partner named Walsh. Walsh asked my daughter about her interest in the firm, her long-term goals, and her approach to problem solving. She answered well, according to the notes I later reviewed. Walsh recommended advancing her to the second round. The second interview was conducted by Stafford himself. I do not know what questions he asked or how my daughter answered them. I only know that his assessment, submitted 2 days later, was significantly more positive than his initial memorandum. He wrote that she demonstrated strong analytical capabilities and a genuine enthusiasm for the firm's mission. He recommended extending an offer. My daughter received the call on a Friday afternoon. She called me immediately afterward, her voice carrying a note of triumph I had not heard since she graduated from business school. She had done it, she said. She had proven them wrong. She had broken through. I congratulated her. I told her I was proud. I did not tell her about the holding company in Delaware, or the 34% stake, or the policy change that had forced Stafford to actually read her application instead of dismissing it with a phrase. I did not tell her because she was not ready to hear it, and because some truths are better discovered than delivered. She started at Whitmore Capital in January. I attended the winter board meeting that same month, sitting in my usual chair at the long conference table, watching the partners discuss quarterly results and strategic initiatives. My daughter's name came up briefly, in the context of new hires. Stafford mentioned that the analyst class was strong this year. Caroline glanced at me, and I gave her a small nod. Afterward, I walked through the lobby and past the row of glass offices where the analysts worked. My daughter was at her desk, staring at a spreadsheet with the intense concentration I remembered from her childhood, when she would spend hours arranging her toys in perfect rows. She did not see me. I did not stop. I went home and sat in my office, looking at the framed photograph of my wife that hangs above my desk. She would have laughed at all of this, I think. She would have said I was being dramatic. She would have reminded me that our daughter inherited her stubbornness from both of us, and that some lessons can only be learned through experience. She would have been right, as she usually was. My daughter and I had dinner last week. She talked for an hour about her work, the projects she was managing, the meetings she attended, the senior partners who had begun to notice her contributions. She mentioned Stafford by name, describing him as demanding but fair. She said the firm had a rigorous culture, but she respected that. She said she finally felt like she was where she was supposed to be. I listened to all of it, eating my pasta and nodding at the appropriate moments. When she finished, she looked at me across the table and said something unexpected. She said she was sorry for what she had told me in her kitchen all those months ago. She said she had been frustrated and scared and had taken it out on me. She said she understood now that success was not about the title on your business card or the name on your office door. She said it was about doing work that mattered, whatever form that work might take. I told her I appreciated that. I told her I had always been proud of her, even when she made it difficult. She laughed, and for a moment she looked like the little girl who used to help me sort screws in the garage, back when my world was simple, and her ambitions had not yet grown into something that separated us. I have not told her about my stake in the firm. I do not know if I ever will. Some part of me wants her to succeed entirely on her own merits, to never know that her father had any hand in opening the door she walked through. Another part of me wants her to understand that the world is more complicated than she imagines, that the barriers we face are often maintained by people who benefit from our exclusion, and that sometimes the only way to change the rules is to become one of the people who make them. For now, I am content to watch from a distance. I attend the board meetings. I review the quarterly reports. I observe my daughter's progress through the careful, neutral language of performance evaluations and project assignments. She is doing well. Her managers speak highly of her. Stafford, in particular, has revised his initial assessment and now describes her as one of the most promising analysts in her cohort. I do not know if he ever thinks about the rejection letter he signed a year ago, the one that dismissed her as not a culture fit. I do not know if he ever considers how different her path might have been if that phrase had been allowed to stand unchallenged. I suspect he does not. Men like Stafford rarely examine the power they exercise casually, the doors they close without thought, the futures they alter with a few careless words. But I think about it. I think about it every time I see my daughter's name in a report, every time I hear her voice on the phone describing some small victory at work, every time I drive past the building where she spends her days believing she earned her place entirely on her own. She did earn it, in a way. She prepared herself. She applied, twice. She sat through the interviews and answered the questions and demonstrated her capabilities. Everything she has achieved at Whitmore Capital, she has achieved through her own effort and intelligence. I simply made sure the door was open. Last Tuesday, I attended another board meeting. The agenda included a discussion of the firm's expansion plans, a review of recent performance, and a proposal to update the company's mission statement. I voted on all of it, speaking when appropriate, remaining silent when silence served better. Afterward, Caroline walked me to the elevator and thanked me for my continued involvement. She asked if I had heard from my daughter recently. I told her we had dinner planned for the weekend. She smiled and said she hoped it went well. I told her I hoped so too. The elevator arrived, and I stepped inside. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of the lobby below, where a group of young analysts were gathered around a conference table, their laptops open, their faces intent. My daughter was among them, pointing at something on a screen, her voice carrying the confident authority of someone who believes she belongs exactly where she is. I pressed the button for the ground floor and waited for the elevator to descend. Through the glass walls, I watched the city spread out beneath me, all those towers full of people making decisions they believe are entirely their own. Some of them are, some of them are not. The distinction matters less than we like to think. When I got home that evening, I made myself dinner. Nothing elaborate. A piece of fish, some vegetables, a glass of water. I ate at my kitchen table, the same table where I had received the call from Whitmore Capital all those months ago, and I thought about what my daughter had said at our last dinner. She had apologized. She had acknowledged that success takes many forms. She had looked at me with something approaching respect. I wanted to believe that something had changed in her. I wanted to believe that the experience of working hard and proving herself had taught her humility, had shown her that the world does not simply hand opportunities to those who demand them. But I know my daughter. I know that her apology, however sincere it felt in the moment, was also a product of her current success. She could afford to be generous now. She could afford to acknowledge my small life because her own life had finally become large enough to satisfy her. If Whitmore Capital had rejected her a second time, would she have called me with the same softness in her voice? If she had been forced to take a position at some lesser firm, one without the prestige and the glass offices and the leather chairs, would she have reconsidered her assumptions about what success actually means? I do not know. I suspect she would not. This is not a criticism. It is simply an observation about the nature of pride and the difficulty of learning lessons we are not ready to receive. My daughter is brilliant and driven and capable of accomplishments I could never achieve. She is also my child, shaped by the same forces that shaped me, carrying the same stubborn certainty that led me to build a business from nothing, and her to chase a dream that nearly crushed her. The difference is that I learned to hide my certainty. I learned to let people underestimate me, to move quietly through rooms where I did not belong, to accumulate resources without drawing attention. My daughter has not learned this yet. She announces herself. She demands recognition. She enters every room expecting to be noticed and becomes angry when she is not. Perhaps she will learn. Perhaps success at Whitmore Capital will teach her that real power often operates in silence, that the people who change the world are frequently those no one sees coming. Or perhaps she will rise through the ranks of the firm, become a partner herself someday, and spend her career exercising the same casual authority that Stafford once exercised over her application. Either way, I will be watching. I will attend the board meetings and review the reports and observe my daughter's progress from the distance I have always maintained. I will not interfere unless I have to. I will not reveal myself unless there is no other choice. I will simply be present, a quiet shareholder with calloused hands and a modest house and a 34% stake in the firm that once dismissed my daughter as not a culture fit. There is a certain satisfaction in this arrangement. Not triumph. Triumph would require my daughter to know what I have done, to understand that her success was shaped by forces she did not perceive. What I feel is something quieter. It is the satisfaction of a problem solved, a wrong addressed, a door opened for someone who could not open it herself. My wife would understand this feeling, I think. She spent her whole life opening doors for other people. She was a teacher for 23 years, working in schools where most of her students came from families with nothing. She used to come home exhausted, her voice hoarse from talking all day, and tell me about the children she was trying to reach. Some of them made it, some of them did not. She never gave up on any of them. I asked her once how she kept going, year after year, when so many of her efforts seemed to fail. She told me that success was not about outcomes. It was about giving people chances they would not otherwise have. Whether they used those chances was up to them. Her job was simply to make sure the chances existed. I did not fully understand what she meant until now. My daughter has her chance. She is working at the firm she always wanted, doing the work she was trained to do, building the career she has dreamed about since business school. Everything that happens from this point forward is up to her. If she succeeds, it will be because of her own abilities and her own effort. If she fails, it will be because of her own limitations and her own mistakes. I have done what I could. I have opened the door. The rest is not my responsibility. But I will keep watching. A father always does. Last night, I dreamed about my wife. We were sitting on the porch of our old house, the one we sold after she got sick, watching the sun set over the neighborhood where we raised our daughter. In the dream, she asked me if I was happy. I told her I was not sure what that word meant anymore. She laughed and said that was the only honest answer. When I woke up, the house was quiet, and the first light was coming through the windows. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table and thought about all the choices that had led me to this moment. The years of work, the careful investments, the patience and the planning and the slow accumulation of something no one expected. My daughter will never know most of it. She will never know about the late nights reading SEC filings, or the meetings with lawyers and accountants, or the careful dance of acquiring shares without attracting attention. She will never know that her father, the man who fixes air conditioners for a living, owns more of Whitmore Capital than anyone else. And that is exactly how it should be. Some gifts are better given in secret. Some doors are better opened by hands that remain unseen. Some fathers are better loved for what they appear to be than for what they actually are. I finished my coffee and rinsed the cup and put it in the drying rack by the sink. Then I walked to my office and sat down at my computer and began reviewing the quarterly projections for my heating and cooling business. There were invoices to send and schedules to update, and all the small tasks that keep a company running. The work of an ordinary life. The work my daughter has spent years trying to escape. But the work that made everything else possible.